Okay, everybody, we are going to begin our third session of the morning. It's called We Need to Talk. And I'm going to introduce Meabh Quoirin, who is going to be our moderator this morning. Come on up. I got this.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just see if I can work this. I can.
The silence is it.
So we've been working to change these stereotypes. It's why we're encouraging more girls to pursue their love for science and technology and engineering and math.
So we're going to try that again, because that, I'm sure, was a lovely clip, but it's not one that I'm responsible for. Let's try and roll the
Is
other
your
video.
company looking to maximize their output while cutting back on costs? With pink sourcing, women are a bargain at the workplace, since you only have to pay them 77 cents on the dollar. And ladies, who cares if you make $30,000 less than men at your job when they have free tampons in the bathroom? After all, women don't even really want to be working anyway. They'd rather be home, taking care of the family, while their husband gets to make life choices and follow his dreams and play fantasy football. Pink sourcing, pretty, cheap labor.
So I see a few chuckles in the audience. I assume the ladies amongst us have seen this. It's trending on all the social media. And I wanted to thank the Huffington Post for reminding us neatly why we're all here this morning. Welcome to one of the panels in this stream on, of course, gender equality. I'm going to briefly introduce myself before, in a few moments, I introduce the formidable lady sitting to the right of me. So I'm Meabh Quoirin. I am the co-CEO of Foresight Factory. We are a global trends agency. We are responsible for digging into the issues, the trends, the big factors affecting what businesses need to thrive today and build success for tomorrow. And it strikes me that this has got to be one of the most important issues that we could be dealing with. How does anyone thrive in the workplace? And it's fair to say that we have quite a lot to talk about this morning. We were extremely excited when Advertising Week asked us to conduct a study across the media, creative, advertising industries to see what the feelings out there, the reality of how gender diversity and gender equality is felt today. So I want to share some of the top results from the study that we conducted briefly before we get into talking about some of these real issues with our panel this morning. So I guess we could be forgiven for thinking, and I'm often tempted to ask the question, why are we still talking about this in 2016? Is perhaps some of the debate that we've been having for however many years a little superficial if we're not getting any further along? Now, don't get me wrong, I for one will be celebrating Google's new line in gender equal emojis when they hit our social media in 2017. But I have to ask the question, is a cartoon form of us females as a welder or a weightlifter really going to change the nature of the debate? How are we going to move the dial? I think a good place to start is this. Frequently being questioned, do women have the ambition that it's going to take? Well, he who shall remain nameless said this. There are no words, in my view, for this kind of comment, so let's speed quickly on to the reality of our ambition. What we actually found was that females and men, of course, are extremely ambitious. If anything, women prepared to state their need to be a leader very strongly indeed. And we expect to be stand up and counted. Our success should be recognized, so all women say. I think it's also interesting to have a look at where women expect hope to be heading for. And as many men as women are certainly aiming for the C-suite. Where, however, we do need to talk about ambition is when we get to this point. The number of men aiming for the CEO's job is 3 in 10. When we asked females the same question, it was just 1 in 10. So today, it's clear that Women are confident in their own ambition. They are absolutely expecting to go incredibly far, but something is stopping us short of going the whole way. We're going to talk about that. Is it true that things can only get better? Well, again, I'm going to have to say yes. We uncovered some unpleasant areas, to say the least. As many as 40% of the women that we talked to in our study had experienced serious gender discrimination. Almost as many as 36 had said they had experienced sexual discrimination, versus just 4 and 5% of men in both cases. And what's almost even more depressing than that is that 25% of women aged 18 to 29 also said that they had experienced some form of gender discrimination. Given how long they've been in the workplace, that's a pretty disappointing statistic, I think you'll agree. You'll all be familiar with this one because it sits in the media every day, it seems, at the moment. Also worth dwelling on is the fact that not only are female CEOs incredibly scarce, but they also tend to disappear. Just 13% of them have more than one tenure, whereas, of course, their male counterparts do indeed recycle their careers around the boards of the Fortune 500. And I think if we were to take away one soundbite this morning, apart from the reality of the situation, the pay gap and so on that we're familiar with, I think one of the things that we were intrigued to see is actually perception is very different between men and women about what the heart of the issue actually is. So just 23% of females believe that they are earning as much as their male peers. And we know that they're right. What was incredibly surprising to us was that just 12% of men didn't think that their female counterparts were earning as much. So they're really just not seeing the issue in the same way at all. 3/4 of the men that we talked to believed that they had a career development plan in their workplace and that they were incredibly well supported. Just 20% of them didn't think that they had enough mentors or role models to follow. But as many as 50% of the women in our survey disagreed that there was career planning in place, and 1/3 felt that they had no visible role models to turn to. And that was true of all females, regardless of their age. So that's not really, or certainly in terms of perception, isn't really changing, which is, again, something we will be talking about. And let me just wrap up by, I suppose, inviting one of the questions again. We're often asked and told that actually what we really need to do is, as women, be ourselves, not try to follow the male role models that we've seen, just do what we do best. Valerie put it to me the other day as bringing more womanly ways into the workplace, shall we say. Does that work for us? Well, it's fair to say that it hasn't done up to now. When we look at the number of women over the age of 45 that have felt they couldn't really express themselves as themselves in the workplace and have the career that they wanted. But let me at least round off with a note of optimism. The dial here is shifting, and it is quite clear that younger females in particular are feeling much more confident about their own individual style of career progression. So there is room for manoeuvre. There's quite a long way to go, but we are at least getting things to be a bit better. Now, of course, what we want to talk about for the rest of the session is what might happen next. Where are we likely to see progress? And so I want to spend some time with the panel talking about two different things. The first thing would be, what have we seen out there that has been, frankly, superficial, interesting, but not really making enough of a difference, versus the things that we are perhaps aware of or not so aware of that are really bringing about change and changing the nature of this gender equality debate. And then I want to move on to what can we look forward to in the future? Who is really being innovative? Who is bringing new and creative strategies to the world of work that we can invest hope in? So thank you for bearing with me while I at least give you some context to our debate this morning. And I'm going to move over to join the panel. I hope you can all still hear me. Yes, microphones are working, which is brilliant. One of the things, so sticking with the sort of superficial thing, I wanted to raise was effectively, are we dancing around the subject too much? So we've seen emojis, we see still very gender-specific commercials. We often even hear about advertisements for positions factoring out language that females won't respond to. So the example we were talking about earlier, some major tech companies using software that screen out words like ambition because apparently females don't respond well to that. So I know I see the look of shock on some of your faces. So I'd like the panel to start. Before we do, let me just introduce the formidable ladies to my right. So this is Kathleen Saxton. Kathleen is the CEO of the Lighthouse Company, founder and CEO, of course. Kathleen sees the extent of our ambition as she places talent into the workplace every single day. Valerie Graves is the author of Pressure Makes Diamonds. Valerie, I think it's fair to say, has absolutely sat at the coalface of where we experience, where we know gender discrimination has been in the industry, having championed very senior roles throughout all of her career, very much in advertising. And Jen Berrent from WeWork. Jen has the enviable title of Chief Culture Officer. And I want to make sure you all understand just how incredibly interesting and different that space is going to be as WeWork look to change, frankly, what diversity means in the workplace and how all of us can thrive in the future. So let's start with the first question. I'll open it up to whoever wants to take it. What would you say to some of the superficial references that I've made? And can they help, or what do we need to do that's different?
Well, I think that it's certainly true that there is power in language, but I'm not sure that we know enough yet about what is powerful language when it comes to women if we're feeling that ambition is a word that women don't respond to. Certainly as a woman of color, I've had to be twice as ambitious as most of the people that I worked with in order to get to some of the places that I've been. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere that I've been. So I think that while it is true that there's power in language and that we need to both watch out for things that have negative connotations and effects and look for things that are affirmative and more womanly. I know of one woman who talks about giving birth to ideas. For example, things as simple as that, that can begin to change the culture. It can have an effect. It's not entirely superficial.
Okay. Kathleen, let me ask you about that. Is ambition a loaded term?
My personal sense is not, and I think as a headhunter who hires for some big industry agencies and media owners, and clearly there are as equal number of women that we want to be looking at for those roles, we don't find that kind of language around ambition is in any way getting in the way of them wanting to progress. I think there is a femininity and elegance maybe to sometimes how we may negotiate, for example. So when we're negotiating on behalf of anybody, but particularly when it may be a female, we may talk about what package would make them come with a happy heart. Rather than absolutely saying we demand that they're paid a certain amount of money. I think that should go for everybody, not just females. But I think we're learning new languages around how we can land our message in a way that's just as powerful, but we don't have to behave as men. I think that's not the answer either. It's about us finding our own language and our own voice. But I'm a little bit, I have to be honest with you, a bit suspicious around excluding certain types of languages like ambition. In my workplace as a headhunter for the last 10 years and as a psychotherapist, I don't see that as a language that's getting in the way of women getting jobs or wanting to go for those jobs.
Interesting. Jen?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things. Part of what WeWork does is we have a mission and we have values, and our mission is to create a world where people make a life, not just a living, and that's for our members or our customers as well as for employees. And one of our values is to be authentic. And I actually think when you create that as a value, you actually expect authenticity from everyone, from women, from people of color, from people who are older, from people who are younger. And there is a sense of then people should be authentic and then also be open to changing the way people do frame things. I actually think some of the language, I'm not sure if ambition, although I had my own reaction to it I could come back to, but I actually think if you can be authentic and say that is offensive to me, then it starts to shape it. And I do that when I'm meeting with executives and when they say things without intention, and it does create a mindset. And so what I have found is by speaking up about women's issues, I'm also gay, speaking about that, about sort of how to frame things, you now have leaders of my company who are men who are really taking the flag. So for example, we had an all-company meeting, which I speak at and the founders speak at, and one of the co-founders who really champions culture with me, he spent his 15 minutes just talking about women and their place and how meaningfully important it is, and how we actually, we had an offsite and we broke up into teams of 10, and then each for this smaller group, and then one person from each of those groups was supposed to come up, and we said, called people up, and 80% were men, and I said, wait, only women come up. And it was just a safe space, and it was just an interesting thing, and only women came up. And two things that were interesting. One is that there were 12 women that in speaking. So first of all, hearing the voice of women over and over again as opposed to the exception was very powerful. It also was fascinating. 6 of the women, or the first 6, really said, I don't like public speaking, I'm nervous, and it calmed down as you went. But what was interesting was that the founder, Miguel, how impactful that was to him, and to say we need to, as a company, keep creating those safe spaces where people can fail. I'm always talking about, you need to be able to sort of get up and feel like you did an okay job, a great job, and not a good job, and that's okay at our company. And so I do think it's, it's pointing things out, as well as the language, and then getting others to come along and say, okay, I see that. And so I think the language matters, and I think pointing things out matters.
So I think that's really interesting, and also something that I think doesn't get talked about enough. What do we as women have in terms of responsibility for creating the discussion that needs to happen? Are we calling things out enough? Are we responsible when it comes to communicating what that ambition should be? Kathleen, I know you have a view on this.
I hope and I think my experience is that by now many businesses, certainly in the puddle of our industry of advertising, are very aware of these issues. But I think there's lots of nervousness around approaching it the wrong way, saying it the wrong way, putting their hand up. I was just talking to someone before we came in this morning who was saying, sometimes I worry I'm on the wrong side of things, and am I going to make some sort of a mistake in the way I handle it? So giving clues as to how to address these things I think is really, really important. And to be able to have very upfront, honest conversations. And I think that can be tricky when we get into potential motherhood conversations, potential part-time working conversations, potential issues around whether we should have positive discrimination, all those kinds of areas, not just with women, but any form of diversity. And I just think that if we could be more willing and open-hearted to understand that we all have to learn more about that, and we therefore may well offend in us to find our way, that would be a better way of approaching it. If we stay too concerned about offending or getting it wrong, we'll never progress, we'll never learn at the pace that we need to. And I think your stats show that my daughter's 18, for example, and her generation absolutely are seeing it through different lenses to maybe mine or my generation, which is great. But actually it's the speed by which I think we're progressing that I'm concerned about, because we should be getting there quicker.
Well, you referenced quotas. We can call this a number of different things, can't we? There's positive discrimination, affirmative action, specific gender quotas. I didn't mention it, but this is one of the things that we find high support for within the study. So I'm curious to know how the panel feels about that, and I suspect they all feel slightly different. And we have potentially 3 very different views on this. I'm going to just put it this way. If we embarked on some of that, wouldn't that speed up some of the change? Valerie, I can tell you're ready to go.
I came into advertising during the golden era, if there ever was one, of affirmative action, even though I was not involved in any specific affirmative action program. And what I find most, your use of the term positive discrimination, boy, that must be British.
Yes.
Because if you ever used a term like that in the United States, you're setting yourself back just by using the D word. I think that it's misunderstood. That generally what that means is all other things being equal, you give preference to the person from the aggrieved or discriminated against group. And I don't think most people even realize that it's not giving an unfair advantage to someone, it's giving an advantage to someone who is equally qualified with somebody else. So I think that that's a case of language getting in the way too, that if you use those terms, then it automatically puts a person at a slight disadvantage.
It's a very commonly used term in the UK. I agree with you completely, Valerie. It's a very commonly used term, and it causes high emotion around, as you say. Does it almost do the opposite, which is it makes people feel, well, they were only chosen for that reason, rather than, as you said, with equal parts of everything else. So
you're not a fan?
I'm not a fan at all, and I'm also not a fan of quotas, I have to say, which I'm sure won't be wholly positive in this room. But if you look at, for example, Norway, which was one of the most pioneering countries to look at quotas, and they have that in place, and actually if you look at their workforce, yes, they're heading much closer to the 50-50 split within leadership. However, they don't have one woman in their version of the FTSE 100. So to your point earlier, yes, there may be the ambition there, yes, they're doing something about quotas, but it hasn't actually resulted in more women being, at the top of leading businesses, which I think that also brings more questions in for me as well.
Yeah, so when we looked at the study, there was high support for it, and also high support or hunger around the US following other, and you'll have to forgive our language, European strategies, Valerie, like extended maternity and paternity leave and other such things. But it is fraught with difficulties. Jen, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we would frame something is to have intention, and from intention comes action. And so what we're trying to do is to create an environment where we have an intention to have senior women. And when you say you have an intention, or to have intention of different voices, or an intention to have inclusiveness, it reframes decisions that allows you to execute on that. It allows you to, when you're thinking about hiring, okay, so maybe I will interview more women than men. Maybe I'll interview more people of color. There's a way when it actually becomes part of the mindset. It also allows for everybody to get on board, to be supportive. Again, sort of talking about this idea of a safe space, of you have to have that intention that we are going to, as an organization, we want women to succeed. We know that's important, and that's important to everyone, to our culture. We do think of it a little bit differently, and I personally think of it a little differently, that we do think of it as a long game as opposed to short term. We're a small enough company now so that we can really make changes for the future. We're under 1,500 employees, so it's big, but it's not established yet. And so I think we do see this as, what things can we put into our company institutionally that pave the way for a longer game, as opposed to saying we need to do something that's going to result in massive change in 6 months, but we think about it as longer term. Our average age of employees is 28, which happens to be younger even than Google or Facebook by about a year. So because we're a younger company, it does give us a little bit more time to sort things out. But
well, let me ask you this as well. Where we have these programs in place to create that long game, where are there still gaps in your view? What advice are we not giving? What coaching or mentoring isn't happening that you think by now we should really be seeing?
Well, on the financial to start with, which to me is disgusting and shocking that should even still be happening in the workplace. And as a headhunter who negotiates many, many packages with my team, both here and in the States and in London, it's shocking. It certainly wouldn't be allowed within our organisation. However, what I would say is I definitely have more men that will phone me and say, or one of my team and say, can you give me a benchmark for what my package should be looking like? Knowing that, for example, we may do 100 commercial directors in a year, I've got a pretty good view of what that mean and average looks in package sense. And they will ask me that before they go into a negotiation, so they actually have some anonymised, but nevertheless some hard-nosed numbers by which to negotiate with their bosses with. I very, very rarely get asked by a woman for the equivalent, and I wish I was, and I wish that women did, because I think, you know, negotiating is always an emotional thing, no matter how bold, brave, ambitious, whatever language you want to use we are. But I think if you're backing it up with fact and you're backing it up with market evaluation and knowledge, you have a much better, firmer platform by which to negotiate. And I'm curious as to why more women don't ask for some of those facts, because they are available to you if you seek them.
One of the strategies that we're seeing press around at the moment is to take negotiations out altogether. So firms like Reddit have effectively put a cap on being able to discuss pay full stop. There is a pay for each level, and that's it. And there are other advantages that can be factored in, but one of them is not, you know, haggling over the size of the salary. And Jen, I know you guys are tackling that. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, I think there are two things we're doing. So one is at the executive level, I actually agree, and I'm developing my own working thesis on why women, including myself, are not as good as we should be. And I mentioned that my next career will be coaching women on how to negotiate pay. I'm very good to negotiate for someone else, but not as good for me, and I do have some thoughts on that. But at our company, we are now experimenting with this idea of a role, different roles have a comp level, and if you're getting hired in for that role, it doesn't actually matter what your previous compensation was. And so you can at least adjust for that someone may have had a discrepancy at their prior job, and then here, you know, a senior designer makes this much cash and this much equity, and maybe there's a band, but as long as you have that title and that scope, then you're going to be in that band. And not in like the old corporate ways. I know, you know, there were like 52 bands at Pepsi or something, and you just, you know, worked your way up in a more modern approach. But to at least try to say then when people are coming in to negotiate, this is all we can pay. If you don't want the job, that's fine with us, you know, but this is what we can pay for that job. And we're really starting to experiment with that, and I'm hopeful that we've done that, just so you know, on one of our company sort of has a retail aspect and then a development aspect. So we run offices and we have a community team, and those are set, you know, so you come in at this level, you make this much, this level, and it is set, and the promotion is set, and the diversity there is unbelievable, right? I mean, it's just, you know, it absolutely is the most diverse part of our organization in all different levels. And so can you take that and sort of roll that out to, you know, the non-retail side of the organization?
So pay is obviously one area where we're letting, we're maybe not advising enough. Valerie, you talked to me specifically about how not enough women feel comfortable enough bringing in their feminine ways. I love the phrase womanly ways, because I just couldn't picture myself before today ever saying that in the workplace. But how do you feel that sort of work also brings in advice, new ways of working, new models for equality?
Well, I do think that generally women are more comfortable being collaborative. And I think that is something that generally works very well in almost any sort of business setting, whether it's more corporate or if it's more of a creative environment. Also, those of us who are parents, I have had a lot of conversations with women in which we talked about the fact that one of the great set of management skills comes from being a parent, because you can't fire your kids. You have to figure out what motivates people individually and how to get the best out of them. So I certainly found that in managing a creative department, which some would argue is, you know, a lot like managing a bunch of kids, but since I was one of the kids, I can say that, that, you know, forming individual relationships with people rather than being hierarchical and, you know, sort of I'm the boss and fall in line is more natural, if you will, or at least more common among women than among men. So those are a couple of things that I think we are collaborative. And surprisingly, a female vice president who was a client of mine from a major corporation told me, you know, women are more confrontational. And I thought, what? You know, but in observation, I found that to be true. I found women to be quicker to say, excuse me, can I talk to you for a minute? You know, about whatever it is and get it out on the table. And I have spoken to some men about why they think that might be true. And I've been told by more than one that men always fear that a confrontation will escalate. And so they confront at the point of, you know, this is a problem and if you don't change, you're going to get fired. Whereas I think women will confront in an effort to solve the problem, resolve the situation. Can I talk to you for a minute about something that's bothering me?
I agree with both those. I actually think the span of types of people I can manage is way different than, is way broader than many of the men. My son's actually a special needs kid, and he's been very different than I am, and I've had to learn how to communicate with him and get him. But there's just, you know, so under me, I'm a lawyer by training, but is marketing or events, HR, and the types of people are extreme extroverts and fun to, you know, the most sort of in their shell lawyer, and having that span is amazing. I also think that women are more straightforward, or I'm at least very straightforward, and men tend to, even if they might get angry or this, they don't necessarily say this is the issue in this, and that's part of actually why I'm this chief culture officer. Part of what was different on the exec team was I was much more apolitical, right? It was just to get to the result, and this is what I think we need, and you're not doing that, or this, and then people also could tell me, I could have feedback, and it was a much more straightforward discussion. I think a lot of men sort of dance a little bit around it, and don't have that, and then they get angry or they fire someone. And so I do think that there are certain skills that women have built over the years through their navigating, whether it's friendships or relationships with their children, etc., that do definitely come into play. And that to us is part of being authentic, and other values, being inspired, is being entrepreneurial, is to take all those things that are inherent to what you may have and, you know, having an opportunity to showcase those.
Exactly, and I think we will have really made progress when we realize that those things may be more native to women, but they can be beneficial to everybody. Men can learn to be more collaborative. Men can learn to be more confrontational in that way of just sort of, you know, really responding to the situation at an earlier point before things escalate. You have to take some kind of action. So we'll really have done something when not only are we able to be authentic in the workplace, but that our womanliness or characteristics that we associate with being women are considered desirable characteristics for anybody.
Yeah, I think several of you have shared with me in our conversations in the run-up that, you know, the part of the issue is that some of those skills just frankly aren't valued at the same level as more patriarchal skills and what we know to be the case. Jen, I'm going to come back to you because it is in your world all about the values. Can you tell us more about the difference that being a CCO makes to an organization? Should every business now have a CCO?
We're talking a little bit about it. It's a very interesting position to be in because part of my job is to think about culture and to think about initiatives that are different than human resources or what people call the people organization. It's really to think about culture as that is part of one of the things that is important to our company. I work with a lot of startups, and I do think early on in a company's life, if you are at a startup, that's the job of the founder, right? They think so much about the culture. That's a huge, huge part of what they are building. And so founder-led companies tend to have a big focus on culture because that's what the founders wanted to build. At our company, what ended up happening is there were 2 co-founders, and one really both of them are very focused on culture, but one spends more of his day-to-day working on it with me. I do think for more established companies to get someone in that founder mindset, that insurgent mindset, a place where culture is critical to what you are building is important. That's part of our whole ethos as a company, right? So we are selling culture and energy in our workspaces. We're not just selling offices. So it's for sure, and we are looking at large companies, large organizations, established Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies that are coming to us and saying, how do we create that culture within our organization? They want that. That's the way to connect. And having someone who thinks about it full time is one way to go.
I'm going to ask all of you, but I'm going to start with Kathleen. Can we name some names? Who has that kind of culture out there?
I'll name some names for
Brilliant.
So, I think culture is one of the most powerful things that will attract you incredible talent, whether it's at the beginning or at the top end of a business. And I think the leader of that company, whether they're a founder, which of course is, it's almost like the most purest essence of that culture, good and bad, but I think it can be very important. But I think also an individual leader can also really bring around cultural change. So, in fact, someone in the audience I can see to my right over here, but someone like AOL, for example, Tim Armstrong, Graham Moisey, some of those individuals in the UK, AOL for a period of time, a number of years ago, had become a little bit bland. It had a lot of great products, but nobody knew what they were buying, how to buy them, how to interact with them. They had a change of leadership, both domestically in the UK and then obviously with Tim and other people, and obviously Verizon's come along and lots has changed. But people now actively say to me, I want to go and work there. So there's a culture in there that really, really sort of matters and is important. I think Facebook have gone through various iterations of their culture. I think just after the IPO, it became a less attractive place to work, and now it's bounced back in again because of the mobile track. But again, culturally, they have a very strong sense of what they do and don't stand for, which at least you can choose. Do I choose to want to be in that culture or not? We work across all 6 of the big agency networks, all of which have a very different flavour of culture. And I think people can then, again, actively choose, could I belong? Do I want to belong within that culture or not? And sometimes as a headhunter, my job is to course correct that, and sometimes to hold the mirror up to those companies and say, this is what the market really thinks about. We do a big survey every year and we hold the mirror up, and some people don't like it, but in the space of a year, a business can go from being in the top 10 to the bottom 10, depending on the culture, the reported culture, and indeed what the leaders or the founders are bringing to that culture. It's incredibly powerful.
Okay. Valerie?
I was thinking about whether I'm even qualified to answer that question, because I'm pretty far into being an author now as opposed to being in a corporate culture. But the last agency that I worked for was interesting in that way. We were called Vigilante. And that was the culture. I had described them in my book. I described our agency as being like that teenager who lives in the basement, with the loud music playing and the keep out sign on the door. And the parent company just kind of paid our bills and left us alone to find out who we were. And ultimately, I can't say it was the most successful of experiments, because I think we began to be resented, for being these sort of rebels that we were. But in a multicultural agency, there was tremendous value in seeing oneself as a rebel sort of organization, because, believe it or not, resisting the pressure to conform, to go along in order to get along, is something that is very difficult and necessary for people of color. So being part of a rebel culture was actually something that I relished a lot.
Good. I think we should start a hashtag female vigilante and get that trending this morning. Are we being bold enough? Has anything that we've discussed this morning really going to go anyway in terms of fixing where we started, that horrific pay gap that we're still living with? If you could change just one thing that would pick just one thing, that would really make a difference, what would you shoot for?
I would go heavy on legislation, funnily enough, which sounds like a bit of a dry topic given I'm a headhunter. But my concern is this: we don't tend to talk to women. We're not allowed to talk about in certain countries their life plan. Okay. You know, and a really good example in the UK would be there's a wonderful, wonderful executive called Claire Velotti, who was at Facebook and she's now at Snapchat. And we headhunted her to become the European leader. And again, I can talk about it publicly because she talks about it publicly. She was very, very early pregnant when I approached her. And she said, Kathleen, I'd love to, but I'm early pregnant. And I said, can I have permission to tell them that and see whether or not they would still like to invite you forward to be interviewed for the job. And the long story short is she is now the European leader of Snapchat. And they hired her pregnant and they paid all of her maternity policy at Facebook that was going to be due to her, etc. And both parties, all parties, were just very open and honest, and it worked beautifully because all the channels were open. So we could just have a very open discussion. Now, legally, I clearly would never and could never have asked her, are you planning on, are you pregnant, etc., etc. So there's something about, yes, us having the right to our privacy and our own plans, of which I respect, but actually I'm seeing many times where people are very open and honest about what they want to achieve in life. And you know, not every woman wants a child or a man wants a child, but certain topics like that, actually we can do more if we handle it elegantly, beautifully, and everybody is very honest about what they want and need, that lots more can happen. So I wonder on legislation whether there's something we need to do to allow that, in the same way that parental leave in some countries has now become 50-50 and all of those things. But again, it's only by talking about it that I think we can make change.
Okay, thank you. Valerie?
Well, I think that some of the issues and some of the recent sort of larger scandals that have come about in advertising are really very basic and primitive. And what I would love to see is for there to be a safe space. It's a lot easier to have a safe space when you're operating up here. But I think of some of the things that happened to me when I was a 26, 27-year-old, little cute girl in the workplace as just being egregious. And that includes having a creative director ask me to drop off a package at the hotel where he was temporarily being housed and answering the door completely naked, dripping wet, and saying, "Oh, hi, kid, you caught me coming out of the shower." And since revealing that story, since sharing it, I have found that that has happened to woman after woman after woman. The naked guy at the door story. And I think that those things are probably still going on. It was the furthest thing from my mind to ever report this to anyone. It was just sort of, okay, here's your package, see you. And I have to assume that's still going on if we're having women who are being grabbed by the throat and said, I'm going to take you in the other room and rape you. So one of the things that I would love to see happen is that we nod in our wonderful and wonderfully forward-looking discussions and ways and looking at how to improve things in the workplace. Please let us not lose sight of those very basic and primitive issues that are being confronted by young women who are not in a safe space.
And
I think those things are right. I would say the biggest thing now that I would see is I talk about I personally have a mission statement that I've had for many years when I went on a yoga retreat when I thought I was going to give up being a lawyer and I stayed. I actually think of I talk to my whole team, what do they want, what's their mission, and then working with people on that. I talk about their professional goals, their personal goals, and then their personal professional goals. And personal goals being like something like running a marathon, and a professional goal meaning like taking a deposition. And then personal professional goals, learning how to speak publicly, being more assertive, for men being more communicative, to learn how to be a better negotiator. And if everyone takes the time to find out individually what those personal professional goals are, I actually think women as well as men will come with skills that allow it to be a more inclusive workspace. And I do think then you have this, an ability to make change going forward, for sure.
Great, thank you. We have just about a minute ahead of us, so I'm going to do something really horrible to my fellow panelists and put them on the spot. We've been running a Twitter poll in the run-up to the event, and I'm going to ask them for their views on what the response should be for 3 quick questions. Ladies, I'm sorry if this will do. Can you pick your option here? What do you think about companies offering egg freezing as a benefit? Nominate your preferred response, please.
I think it's pressure to delay. I'm clearly heading for my menopause now, but I worry about us tampering with the delivery time of children. That worries me slightly. As much as I'm sure for some women it would be an incredible gift for a company to give, it worries me.
Okay. Valerie?
Well, I would tend to agree. It puts pressure on women as well. You know, you could freeze your eggs and you know, be having a career right now rather than deciding to have your children at a certain age. Because I think there is kind of an optimal time for having children when you have the energy to do it as well as the maturity, and there might be pressure to put it off. You could freeze those eggs.
Jen, do you have the same view, a different view?
Yeah, I just don't think that's the right place for the employer to be, is talking to women about when they...
Well, you'll all be thrilled to know that while they didn't pick pressure to delay, irrelevant. One more quick one. What's the best way to drive this? So we talked about our strategies that we would prefer, but does anything here stand out? I know the one you're not going to pick.
It's coaching and mentoring for me. I just think it's our duty as women who have progressed by the look of it in our careers to help others and show them, you know, ways that which may be useful and helpful to them as individuals.
Would everybody agree with that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah? It is the correct answer. Well done, ladies. And I thought I'd save you the pain. And just because we're out of time now, I'm going to give you the answer to this one. What holds women back? And the unfortunate response to this one was workplace sexism. We are going to have to leave it there. Thank you all. Thank you to my esteemed panel for joining me this morning. For those of you who would like more detail and who want to see the full results of the study, that's all available on the website that we've had up, and we're going to continue the debate for the rest of the week on Twitter. We'll be posting some blogs, and do interact with us if you will. Thank you all so much.